Good afternoon, everyone. We'll wait just a moment. We have some additional attendees who are trickling in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Well, welcome everyone to our webinar series about the BEAD challenge process. My name is Laura Sasaki. I'm one of the broadband program project supervisors here in the BEAD branch of the California Public Utilities Commission. We really appreciate you taking the time to join, learn a little bit more about what the next phase of the challenge process. And this is our sixth webinar. So many of you have attended in the past. And so we've kind of gone over the BEAD basics and how to submit challenges in the portal. A thank you to everyone who took the time to participate in the challenge phase and submitted challenges. So for the next phase, the rebuttal phase, the topics we'll cover today are mainly for broadband service providers participating in the rebuttal phase, but we want to welcome everyone because there are particular challenges that other entities can rebut. And so we'll be presenting on that as well today. Broadband service providers will have the greatest number of opportunities to rebut, but for some challenges with valid evidence, we'll give you those examples today in our webinar. We also appreciate those of you when you registered that you submitted some questions for us. We will capture those with some responses for our FAQs. And today we're really happy to have Joanne Hovis with us. She's president of CTC Technology and Energy, and Clayton Woolley. He's the director of technical strategy at Ready.net. CTC serves as one of the CPUC's key partners and contractors in this process, developing the BEAD program, and Ready.net has developed the challenge portal and has been a key partner in the process. So again, thank you for being here, and I am going to hand it over to Joanne.
Thank you, Laura. And I just want to confirm that you can hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great, thank you. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm really glad to have this opportunity to present to you today regarding the rebuttal phase of the challenge process. Let me just start first by showing you the overall agenda for the time we're going to spend together today. As you can see, now that the challenge process is complete in California, the challenge phase of the process, we're not going to go through all the elements of the BEAD program. Instead, we're going to look at the overall timeline very quickly, and then talk about the purpose and mechanics of the rebuttal phase, which is the topic of today's discussion and the critical next step of the overall California challenge process for the BEAD program. This will include showing you how to submit a rebuttal, and Clay will guide you through a live demonstration on the portal to show you exactly what it looks like. We'll conclude with informational next steps and office hours. But let's start first with just some quick housekeeping items, some reminders and tips that we always share to help you get the most out of today's webinar. We've also provided English closed captions, which you can access by selecting Show Captions on your screen. If you have any questions, we really do welcome them. Please submit them using the Q&A function on the Zoom screen. You can submit questions there. You can also view other attendees' questions, because if someone else posts a question that you have also, please feel free to upvote it so we know that it is a popular question coming from multiple stakeholders. We're not going to be able to answer the questions live during this meeting, but we are recording all of them, and answers will be added to the frequently asked questions on the CPUC's BEAD challenge process webpage. Also, please keep an eye on the chat throughout this webinar, as we'll be posting links that are relevant to what we're discussing so that you have access to additional resources. Final note, while we are in the housekeeping category, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the CPUC website for asynchronous review of the information that is provided so that you can review this again at your convenience and do so as many times as you would like. So now, having covered housekeeping, let's dive into the webinar itself. Let's start by talking about the timeline. According to the rules that were set out by NTIA, and very important to note that the framework for all of this is NTIA's. It is a federal set of parameters for the program. The entire challenge process must occur within 120 days, which includes the challenge phase, evidentiary review, the rebuttal phase, which we'll talk about today, final determination, and then submittal by the CPUC to NTIA of the final data that comes out of the challenge process for NTIA's approval. The CPUC published the initial map of locations for the challenge process on June 17th, and the challenge phase took place from July 8th through August 6th. We are now in the evidentiary review process, and we will begin accepting rebuttals through the portal beginning on August 21st. As you'll recall, NTIA has established rules that allow only these entities to be considered eligible challengers as part of the challenge process: local and tribal governments, nonprofit organizations, and broadband service providers. In addition, the rules provide that the aspects of service that can be challenged include such items as first, internet speeds and other specifications, which we'll show on the following slides, which determine BEAD location eligibility, the identification of community anchor institutions, or a challenge of the eligibility of certain types of community anchor institutions that are in the data set. That's a second. Third is identifying or challenging enforceable commitments to build at specific locations, meaning that there is an enforceable commitment for that location to be built, and thus it should not or should be BEAD eligible. And fourth, identifying planned service that is anticipated for specific locations, meaning that there is a plan that service will be delivered there, and thus that location should not be eligible. The specific challenge types under the NTIA rules are summarized here, and just briefly, they include availability, which is that a certain level of speed is not available at that location. I'm sorry, that high-speed internet is not available at all at that location. Speed, showing that while internet might be available, the speeds there are below the standards that have been established for the BEAD program for what is considered served or underserved. Latency, showing that certain service latency exceeds a certain amount. Data caps, demonstrating that the plan has an unreasonable data restriction. Technology, demonstrating that the technology at a certain location is inaccurately reported. Business service only, demonstrating that only business service is offered at a location, and thus, as a result, there is not a residential product, and that location should be eligible for residential service. An enforceable commitment, which I discussed a minute ago, planned service, as I discussed a minute ago, that a location is not part of an enforceable commitment, and the data in the map are wrong, and that location should thus actually be eligible for BEAD. That the location is a community anchor institution and thus should be designated as such, or that the location is not a community anchor institution and should not be designated as such for purposes of how the BEAD program treats community anchors. These are the kinds of challenge types that were received in the challenge phase of the process. And they're also the types of challenges that the rebutters will be responding to during the rebuttal phase. And those first six that I mentioned, availability, speed, latency, data cap, technology, and business service only, are the ones that were most commonly received and are likely to make up many of the rebuttals. As you will recall, each of these challenge types is associated with specific evidentiary standards that were covered in previous webinars. We're focusing on rebuttals today, so we're not going to cover the evidentiary type for each individual challenge, but as you will recall, those were discussed in some details on earlier webinars, which are available for you to view on the CPUC's BEAD challenge process website, and also in the CPUC's initial proposal, Volume 1, which described in detail the evidentiary standards and other elements of the BEAD program. So with all of that reminder and background, let's move into talking about the rebuttals and the rebuttal phase itself. This phase of the challenge process is the time frame in which eligible rebutters may provide evidence to counter the challenges that were submitted during the challenge phase. The rebuttal phase is an opportunity for an entity whose data have been challenged to come back and establish through evidence that it actually had it right in the first place and that the challenge is not meritorious. The challenge phase will last for 30 days between August 21st and September 19th. It is really critical to note that rebuttals will be accepted only from providers that have registered in the CPUC's challenge phase portal. Service providers will be notified of challenges that have been submitted to their locations at the beginning of the rebuttal phase or before that. And then they will have the opportunity to submit their rebuttals once the rebuttal phase begins. All rebuttals must be completed by September 19th. We recommend that you register in the portal as soon as possible if you're not already registered. Okay, so let's talk about who can be involved in the rebuttal phase. And generally, the great majority of the rebuttal activity will be done by broadband service providers whose data in the map face challenges from challengers during the challenge phase of the challenge process, that challenge phase that just closed recently. So the broadband providers are the only entities that can rebut or concede a challenge related to classification of their service locations. So for example, a speed or availability challenge to their service at a given location. And these rebuttals will be designated specifically by that service provider in the portal. In just a few minutes, we'll show you exactly what that looks like. However, there are additional ways that other entities can participate in the rebuttal phase. For example, all eligible challengers may rebut certain kinds of challenges, including planned service challenges and enforceable commitment challenges. Any rebutter that is registered in the portal may rebut these particular kinds of challenges, so long as they are an eligible challenger under the rules. And you'll recall I mentioned who those entities are: upfront, tribal, and local government, and nonprofits, in addition, of course, to the service providers themselves. And then relevant community anchor institutions may rebut challenges regarding their community anchor institution status or their service levels. Now, in order to do this, a community anchor institution will need to be a registered challenger in the portal, or we'd need to partner with a registered challenger. And the rebuttal has to be done within the portal. Let's talk about rebuttal options for broadband service providers now. When there is a challenge that is designated for a specific broadband service provider based on a claimed level of service at a specific location, that service provider has three options for how it can respond during the rebuttal phase. First, the provider has the option of providing evidence that disputes the challenge and thus rebutting. Once the provider provides rebuttal evidence, that location is now designated as disputed, meaning there was a challenge, there's a rebuttal to the challenge, and now the CPUC will have to review the evidence and issue a determination of whether the challenge should be accepted or rejected. The second option the provider has is to leave that item unrebutted and do nothing, leave the challenge unrebutted and do nothing. The provider may choose to do nothing if it does not have sufficient counter evidence, or frankly, if it does not act in time. This would be considered an unrebutted challenge. And if that challenge is not rebutted, and if it satisfies the evidentiary standards for the program, that location is entered into the sustained site. Sustained state. That means that that challenge will be accepted pending CPUC and NTIA approval, but the rebuttal has there has not been a rebuttal, and therefore the challenge will be considered on its merits. The third option is that the provider can choose to indicate agreement with the challenge by choosing to concede the challenge. Now, how might this occur? Well, it might be that the provider looks at its own data and realizes that the data that was originally on the map was incorrect. Its internal evidence establishes that the challenge is actually valid. And in that case, the provider chooses to concede the challenge. And in that case, the location enters the sustained state that it is effectively in the accepted bucket pending CPUC and NTIA approval. In the event that there is a challenge that is not designated for a specific broadband service provider, such as, for example, there's a community anchor institution challenge or a planned service challenge, then any permissible challenger would be able to rebut it. So there would not, in that case, be an option to concede the challenge because it is not directed at a specific broadband service provider that is in a position to concede. And that is the framework for the types of options that rebutters, registered rebutters who are broadband service providers would have in evaluating the challenges provided to their locations, their claimed locations. Now, let's talk about the evidence that is required for specific types of rebuttals. The most important aspect of rebuttal is the evidence. This evidence is necessary to substantiate the rebuttal. A rebuttal that just claims challenger was wrong is not going to be a persuasive rebuttal. The NTIA has established strict evidentiary standards to ensure that both challenges and rebuttals are backed by accurate and substantive evidence. And all of that evidence, some of which I will describe today, those evidentiary standards are, as you will recall, described in detail in our earlier webinars, which are available for you to view on the website and in the initial proposal, Volume 1, that was adopted by the CPUC. Let's talk about the evidentiary requirements first for the first type of rebuttal that we're discussing now, which is availability challenges. And as you know, an availability challenge is one in which the challenger attempts to demonstrate that broadband service is not available at a particular location. In this case, the broadband service provider is the rebutter. And in the case of many of the other types of rebuttals as well, but certainly in this case when it comes to availability. And as rebuttal evidence, that broadband service provider can provide evidence to show that the location actually does have service, in that the resident or business at that location subscribes to service or has subscribed to service in the past 12 months. So the provider can provide a screenshot of the availability of service as a form of evidence to rebut, for example, evidence provided by the challenger was a screenshot that purports to show that service is not available at that location, and the provider is rebutting through evidence of the same sort, but that provides the data that they believe are accurate. Another type of evidence the rebutter could potentially provide is that service is available as a standard installation or has been installed in recent months, within the past 12 months. Let's talk now about the evidentiary requirements for rebutting a speed challenge. Speed challenges, as you know, are an effort to demonstrate the actual speed of service at a location falls below the thresholds that have been established for purposes of the BEAD program and should thus be classified as unserved or unserved rather than the classification that was originally on the map. So in order to do this, challenges provided during the challenge phase speed tests that challenged these speeds. And in this case, the service provider is the identified rebutter to each of the speed challenges. For evidence to support a rebuttal, that service provider could provide something, for example, like countervailing speed test evidence showing sufficient speed coming from the provider's own work management system. And there's considerable detail in the initial proposal volume 1 about what that data can look like and how the
I think we might have lost Joanne there for a moment. I wanted
managed and then documented. There's also some further clarification on the, are you hearing me?
we did lose you there for a minute, and honestly, I couldn't tell you where it stopped, but for literally for about a minute, we lost what you were.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm going to go back one.
It was just a bit about the countervailing speed test.
To the beginning of the speed rebuttal slide. Oh, I apologize to all the attendees for my technical difficulties. I am in a location that clearly has less stable internet and
so I'm going to mute Joanne for just a moment. Amy, are you able to step in with the slide that we're on?
I can step in, and I appreciate Sam's help in advancing the slides as well. So thank you so much. I mean, Joanne stopped right at the evidence of speed rebuttal, which included countervailing speed tests, showing sufficient speed from the provider's own network management system. And I think that's where we lost her. So again, there's further clarification on the next slide. So you can find additional guidance on speed tests in the initial proposal and volume 1, and I recommend that you carefully review that, because there are a lot of requirements for speed tests in particular. There's also guidance in the challenge process policy notice and the resource guide or the user guide for challengers. So again, those documents will be an excellent resource in the types of evidence that you can provide to rebut these challenges. Speed tests, again, must show speeds that are above 100 megabits down and 20 megabits up per second. And they must consist of 3 measurements from 3 different days, and they must be conducted between 7 and 11 p.m., so prime traffic time, and the median must be above that 100 by 20 megabits per second in order to rebut the challenge. So really think about, like, there's quite a requirement for speed test rebuttals. The measurements must include the time and the date of the speed test and the IP address from the residential gateway of those tests. And the process for area speed test challenges is a little bit different, which we will get to when we cover challenges, the challenge rebuttals later. There are many more challenges and rebuttal types beyond speed and availability, which we will now go through. So again, permissible rebuttals for latency and data cap challenges are specific to those challenges. They are also exclusively for the service providers to rebut. So for latency, permissible rebuttal evidence includes a countervailing speed test that shows the latency below 100 milliseconds. The speed test would follow the same speed test standard that was outlined in the prior slides. Now for the data cap, if a challenger challenges to show service plans have an unreasonable data cap or unreasonable capacity allowances, then the broadband service provider can demonstrate that there are plans that are available without such a data cap. There are also challenges that are reserved for the relevant service provider to rebut. For technology challenges, in particular, if a challenge provider indicates that the technology indicated in the data set is incorrect, an ISP can rebut it by showing a residential gateway that matches the provided service in the shown in the data. For business service only challenges, this won't surprise you, a provider can actually show documentation that the service listed in the data is available at the location and is actually marketed to consumers. So some of these levels of evidence are fairly straightforward, but it does, again, highly recommend that you look through the initial proposal volume 1 and the policy notice to make sure that you understand these requirements. Okay. So moving on to another typical challenge that we see, an enforceable commitment challenge. So if a challenger claims that there is an enforceable commitment at the location that's not included in the data, any registered entity can actually provide a rebuttal. The evidence required would be documentation that the broadband service provider has defaulted on the commitment or is otherwise unable to meet the commitment. You can also include other documentation that the enforceable commitment is invalid, incomplete, or does not apply to a particular location. On the flip side, the not part of an enforceable commitment challenge really is only submitted if a location is not covered by an enforceable commitment. This happens if it claims to be in an enforceable commitment area and it's not actually covered by such an enforceable commitment. So for example, if it's in another area of an enforceable commitment, but the commitment doesn't apply to that particular location or group of locations. Under some circumstances, there may be rebuttals for this type of challenge, but they may only come from the provider. Some evidence that counters this challenge may include evidence that the provider has not defaulted, is able to meet the commitment, or evidence that the location is covered by an enforceable commitment. And again, this is an example of something that's really only rebutted by a provider. Planned service is another category of popular challenges that includes both planned service and existing service. And in this case, really it includes existing service because, as you know, the planned service challenge requires that the broadband has been deployed at a location by June 30th. So we're really talking about service that's in place by June 30th, 2024. Without an enforceable commitment or beyond an enforceable commitment. So it includes existing service. So what does that mean in terms of rebutting evidence? That really means that acceptable rebuttal evidence would entail documentation that shows the provider is no longer able to meet the commitment by that date, or has not deployed a network that meets the commitment or does not meet any of the technology or performance standards required for BEAD awards. Let's continue. For locations is a CAI or community anchor institution. Challenges that claim location on the map should be classified as a CAI. The rebuttal evidence would indicate that location does not fall within the definition of a CAI according to initial proposal volume 1. And that is no longer in operation or has moved from such a location. If the challenge claims the location on the map is not a community anchor institution, the rebuttal evidence would be evidence that the location falls within the definition of a CAI. For example, official documents from the organization with their mission, activities, projects, and street address so that it can be confirmed that it fits the definitions within IPv1 or initial proposal volume 1, and that it should be classified as a CAI for these purposes. The definition, again, is found in initial proposal volume 1. To rebut challenges of qualifying broadband service being available or unavailable to a community anchor institution. And again, the standard is a bit different for community anchor institutions. Community anchor to be an eligible community anchor institution for BEAD purposes. And again, community anchor institutions are prioritized after unserved, underserved locations. It must have less than a gigabit of symmetrical service to be considered an eligible community anchor institution. So again, what does that mean for these purposes? It really means whether or not the CAI can actually obtain what is considered qualifying broadband service or that gigabit symmetrical service. So to rebut challenges of qualifying broadband service being available or unavailable to a community anchor institution, the acceptable rebuttal standard is to submit evidence to the contrary. So whatever the claim was, that the gigabit service is or is not available, depending on the situation. That concludes the types of rebuttals that are permissible in the challenge process. And again, this webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the CPUC's website for you to review again if needed. This information is also available in the CPUC's initial proposal volume 1, NTIA's challenge process policy notice, and the CPUC's user guide for the portal. Before moving on to rebuttals in the challenge portal, let's look at a few variants of the challenges that require different rebuttal methodology. These are the area challenges and pre-challenge modifications. So first, area and MDU challenges, or multi-dwelling unit challenges. Area and MDU challenges are triggered when a certain number of challenges of the same challenge type are submitted in a single census block or a multi-dwelling unit for the same technology, service, and the same service provider. So it has to be, again, multiple challenges of the same type, an availability challenge, a speed test challenge, that challenge the same technology type for the same service provider. It cannot be just 6 challenges in an area. So again, once the area or MDU challenge is triggered, and this is an automatic trigger once there are sufficient challenges of that same service type to the same provider in the same area with the same technology in a census block, and that is, we'll go over that in a second, then that automatically triggers in the system an area or a multi-dwelling unit challenge. So again, it's 6 challenges that are accepted in a census block, and the multi-dwelling unit depending upon the size. So these area and MDU challenges, they are accepted for availability, speed, latency, data cap, technology challenges only. When they're received, the provider must demonstrate that they are meeting the requirements for all served locations within the area units, the census block groups, or the MDU. The provider can use any permissible rebuttal type identified earlier, although some challenge types like speed or latency require a different methodology. For MDU challenges, the rebuttals must show, as indicated on the slide, they must show that the inside wiring is reaching all of the units and is of sufficient capacity or sufficient quality to support the claimed level of service. And I want to emphasize again, the provider must provide a rebuttal to all of the locations within a census block in its service territory to rebut such a challenge. So for an area challenge, all of the locations, not just the initial locations, the 6 initial locations that trigger the challenge, but all of the locations in your service territory that are being challenged in a census block must provide rebuttal evidence for each of those locations. Sometimes that gets missed. We want to make sure that there's a full understanding of that here. So again, for the availability challenges, the rebuttal must be in whole or by location to show that every location in that service block or the MDU has the service available to it that meets BEAD standards. This can be done by network diagrams that show fiber or hybrid fiber coaxial infrastructure or by subscriber information. For area challenges against fixed wireless service, the rebuttal must also include evidence of service availability and/or speed for a representative random sample of the area with no fewer than 10 locations. For speed area challenges, which require speed tests, the provider must provide a random sample of at least 10% of the customers in the applicable area or the multi-dwelling unit. The provider will use the 80-80 rule as a standard to show that service is acceptable, meaning that 80% of the randomly selected locations must equal or exceed 80% of the threshold. For example, in a speed test, 80% of the locations must meet 80% of the speed threshold, meaning that they should be at least 80 megabits download and 16 megabits upload. The speed test must be conducted again between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. Latency area challenges require similar standards for speed tests. Not surprisingly, for those that the provider must rebut at least 10% of the customers in the challenged area, and it must be randomly selected and meet 80% of the locations must record a latency that does not exceed 100 milliseconds. So before the challenge process began, the CPUC conducted several pre-challenge modifications, one of which is rebuttable. For the locations shown in the broadband map as served by cellular fixed wireless, the CPUC recategorized them as underserved for the purposes of the BEAD program and consistent with initial proposal volume 1. This challenge is rebuttable by the service provider. To successfully rebut this modification, the cellular fixed wireless provider must demonstrate that it's providing 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up, or better service at the relevant locations. And that it has sufficient network capacity to simultaneously serve at least 80% of claimed locations in the relevant coverage areas. So simultaneously serving, that is to say, really, as concurrently active subscribers have at least 80% of the claimed locations in the coverage area. And they must have a capacity of 5 megabits per second for each claim location that's considered sufficient. Look at this. That concludes the end of our rebuttal phase. Following the rebuttal phase comes the final determination phase, which we'll briefly mention. Now, before advancing to the live demonstration about how you can submit rebuttals in the portal. During the rebuttal phase, some locations will be resolved into a determination of sustained. If the rebutter chooses to accept the challenge, the remaining challenges that are left unresolved at the end of the rebuttal phase will be adjudicated and resolved in the final determination phase. The state will then conduct a review of the challenges and the rebuttal evidence and make a final decision by labeling the challenge either sustained or rejected. If it's sustained, the challenge will be changed, will change the state's list of proposed eligible location and the data set. If it is rejected, the challenge will not impact the list of eligible locations in the data. The state will take all final decisions and send the proposed list of eligible locations to NTIA, or the federal government, for final approval. Then NTIA will review and approve the list of eligible locations. Once that list, that final list is approved, that updated list of locations will be the set of locations that is eligible for BEAD funding. So it is, again, critical that that data be as accurate as possible, because that final set of locations that NTIA approves will be the list that is available for BEAD funding. And then that will conclude the challenge process as a whole. So now that we've gone through the role and the process of rebuttals in the challenge process, we'll show you what that all looks like in the portal. So I'll turn over the presentation to Clayton Woolley from Ready.net, who has implemented the challenge portal and will provide the demonstration. Clay?
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. I'm going to pull up the screen real quick. All right. And can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Can you make it a little bigger?
Yes. How's this?
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay, wonderful. All right, everyone. Great to talk to you all again. And there's some written instructions in the slides that will be made available following the webinar. So we're going to quickly go through two different challenge personas. So the first one that we're in right here is as an ISP. So as always with demo, we are in a test environment with test data to protect everyone's privacy. So you'll notice if you're an ISP, when you log in, your dashboard is going to change a little bit. So for this example, this provider has received five challenges. One has already been rebutted, and these are the 4 remaining. So I'll click in to this rebuttal, and very similar to the challenge process itself, it's going to take you to the map so you can get a good idea of where these locations actually are. And you will also see some of the details of the challenge, who was challenged, which locations, and what the results are. So you'll have a full list of what was challenged, as well as the current status of that original challenge, which will then bring you into the rebuttal. So after selecting rebuttal, you can go through and select which locations you want to rebut. So for example, you can rebut all of them, or you can agree with all of them. You can also go through and select certain locations where you are planning to concede the challenge. So after finalizing your location list, you'll go in, and we provided an evidence mapping template. So on the other screen here, you can see the template that needs to be filled out and goes along with your evidence files for each of the locations. And after selecting your locations, the location ID will be pre-populated in that template for you. So after reviewing and mapping, you will upload the completed template there. You have an additional spot to go back and reference the written materials and challenge guide. And then you can upload your evidence, which is here. And finally, add a written description. So here is my evidence. So upon completing this section, it will bring you to an attestation that the data that you provided is accurate and true to the best of your knowledge, at which time you will confirm and submit the challenge. So it's uploading the files. And then when you return to your dashboard, you will see that you now have 2 rebutted challenges. And then quickly switching personas, we're going to go to the test nonprofit to take a look at what a nonprofit would be able to rebut. So looking in their dashboard, you'll see submitted challenges and then also what's open for rebuttal. So as we talked about in the slides above, planned or existing service can be rebutted if you have evidence that a planned or existing service challenge may not be accurate. So very similar workflow. You'll go through, take a look at the locations on the map. You can see the original challenge as well as the status. And you'll go through to the rebuttal, start that process, and you can select all or unselect all, or go through and do individual locations. This time we'll go through and select all, proceed. Same type of workflow. This will change a little bit based on the challenge type, but the instructions are written into the portal. So you'll upload your completed rebuttal evidence file. That can be downloaded here with the location IDs. Then add in your evidence for why this challenge should be rejected. There we go. And finally go through and attest again to the accuracy and completeness of this provided evidence. And then you'll go through, submit your rebuttal. And upon returning to the dashboard, you will see that this is now successfully rebutted and there are no other planned or existing challenges available for rebuttal. And that concludes the demo portion for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Clay. Appreciate that. So if we can go ahead and bring up the slides. Excellent. So we'll talk a little bit about next steps. But before we do that, I do want to just kind of talk about one thing that you can expect if you are potentially a challenged either service provider or in some cases a CAI. We are going through and evaluating the evidence that has come in during the challenge process. And so we'll be doing that over the next couple of weeks. So during that time, we will be updating in the portal if a challenge has been accepted, which means that you as a service provider will get those notifications and it will show up in the list in the portal that Clay showed you. So you'll want to be checking that regularly just to make sure that you're aware if you have received challenges. You probably will also get a notification from the portal as well, but that will be the process to check and know if you've received a challenge. We got through a number as they were rolling in, but we also set aside specifically the next couple of weeks for us to be able to evaluate that and make those determinations and then notify folks if they have received a challenge and need to provide a rebuttal. So that's kind of what you can expect over the next couple of weeks. And also, resuming next Thursday, we will be starting office hours up again, and we will run them from next Thursday through the close of the rebuttal phase on September 19th. And that is going to be in the same format that we have been doing, which is it is a meeting where we go back and forth and we talk. We have you guys submit questions, and then we, to the best of our ability, we answer them for you live. And so we'll be doing that. We'll be closing that out at the end of the rebuttal phase. And then just keep an eye on the BEAD events page for any upcoming events as we continue to move through both the challenge process, but also through the BEAD program as a whole. So if you have any questions, we'll go on to the next slide. So for those of you who may have questions about how to use the portal or having issues getting into the portal, please submit an email to the CA help desk at ready.net. They can help you with that. And then if you have general questions about the BEAD program, please email us at bead@cpuc.ca.gov, and that is our primary inbox for all questions for BEAD. It allows us to know what's coming in from you and be able to get back to you on a pretty good turnaround time. We thank you because you have sent us lots of really good questions, and we will continue to monitor that throughout the lifespan of the BEAD program. So again, thank you for all of those. These are some of your resources. We also have additional resources that are available on our website. And we have kind of a general page that has the history of BEAD, both the program and also in California, because as the Public Utilities Commission, we have our own processes that have been part of that process. And so that's documented on that. You can see exactly what happened and how those decisions were made. The challenge page is really dedicated to information on the challenge process. We also have a frequently asked questions. So those questions that come in both in our office hours and to our email box, and then what we were talking about here in the Q&A, those will be captured and answered there. And then we also have the link for the BEAD Challenge Home, and that is specifically a landing page that gives you information about how to get into the portal if you still need to register. If you want to view the map is there and you can view that. So we really thank you for taking the time to be here with us today to learn more about the rebuttal process. Like I said, if you've got questions, please take a look at some of the materials that we provided links to. Those will give you more specific information about what you can expect for the evidentiary requirements. And then we also welcome you coming to office hours to ask questions as we go through the process. So thank you so much. We appreciate it, and we hope that you have a wonderful afternoon.